An Eye of Ra represents this tribe. They not only kept the history of their own tribe, they kept the history of all tribes. So what we present to you is over 65,000 years of oral tradition, and stating that there was a previous civilization before what is known as dynastic Egypt, before what is known as Egypt to Egyptologists, that existed and was very highly advanced, built the pyramids, carved the Sphinx. And that's what we're going to show you. And again, I'm going to purposefully make this brief so we can get into the slides. We have a lot of slides to show. And I probably won't even have time for many questions, because what I certainly do not want to do is take 1 minute away from Christopher's wonderful presentation. But since I'm going to be here, we'll be here this evening, tomorrow, and if questions, you can always approach me. But we probably won't have much time because we'll probably go right to the end. But first of all, before we're going to reestablish this idea, we're going to create a whole new discipline, we have to start with the name itself, Egypt. Egypt is the name of the country in northeastern Africa today. That was not the name of the ancient civilization. And this is how it was derived. Egypt is actually a Greek word, or a derivation of a Greek word, which was a contraction called He-Ge-Petos, which became Egyptos, which is where Egypt comes from. Now this Greek word actually comes from the ancient term Het-Ka-Ptah. And by the way, Kipidiptos is where the word Koptos comes from, where the word Coptic Christian comes from, and where the town of Koptos was from. But the ancient term was Het-Ka-Ptah. Het means place. Now, Ka is a subject we can go on for hours in a lecture too. Many people have talked about Ka, written books about Ka, think they know what it means, but it actually, the best way to translate it would be the etheric double, or the astral body, or we prefer the definition, the physical projection of the spirit, which is the personality, which is what attaches itself to the body, not the physical body, where the Egyptians added a T to it, Khat or Chet, which meant organs or body. So it actually is the personality. But these people believe that the personality is connected to the body. So this is why in the tombs that you see in Egypt, they made offerings to the Ka. It's like what you could say in New Age terms, the etheric body or the double. And Ptah is a whole series, we could give hours of lecture on itself, but so-called one of creator gods, which is not correct, but we'll use that because you're all familiar with that. So Ptah, so this meant the place where the physical projection of Ptah manifested. And it was only one area, one site, which the Greeks called Memphis. The ancient term was Mennefer. It was the capital of the ancient dynastic civilization. One area. The ancients called their civilization Kemet. And actually, that's a later derivation. The real term was Chem. And it's even in existence today because the Egyptians, one of their terms, the Arabic term for Egypt is Al-Chem. Does that name sound familiar? Alchemy. That's where alchemy comes from. It's the arts and sciences of ancient Kemet. So Kemet is the word. It meant the black land. Now people will ask me, well, what does that mean? Well, basically, this civilization was always based on a river, the Nile. Now, not the Nile as she is today, as we're going to discuss briefly. Again, in my book is more detail. The ancient civilization I'm talking about had an ancient river, which we call the Nil, which was named by a German researcher named Blankenhorn in the early 20th century, which was is all Western desert today. But this river was huge. It was 100 miles across, thousands of miles long. All of northern Africa at one time was all lush and green with this great river with tributaries. The desert as it is today is less than 10,000 years old. So this civilization was pre-desert. So it was based on this ancient river, the Nile, the Nil, which is Western desert. And the word means a black land. It's the alluvial, dark, rich soil that the river deposits when she floods. And that was the basis of the civilization. You're going to see a slide I'm going to show you of Egypt. And people are amazed that all this civilization was a thin strip of green land around the river, and the rest was desert. That's dynastic times. But even so, the ancient people called it the black land, meaning the rich soil deposited by the river where they grew their crops, their civilization. So, first thing we say is we don't teach Egyptology. Chris introduces me as an Egyptologist. Well, I'm not. I'm a chematologist. And it's a whole new discipline. So, for you have a framework for what we're going to show you, we also still have to lay a groundwork. And one of the major themes of teaching that my teacher gives to us is the fact of cycles. Now, I'm called a paradigm buster, so is David. And it's an honor to follow David in presentation because I consider him not only a friend, my publisher, but perhaps one of the great diffusionist researchers that's ever lived. And his presentation showed that, how he's able to pull things from all areas of the world which he has seen, he has been, to show the similarities. And we are diffusionists, no doubt about it. And in fact, I can't believe how anybody could be an isolationist. But one of the major paradigms that want to see destroyed completely is this idea of linear evolution. That we've always just gone on a straight line, from the primitive to the complex. This is total nonsense. Everything in nature moves in cycles. And that's what indigenous people teach, cycles. And that's what we're presenting to you, cycles. And what we are now is just the end of a cycle. So my teacher has given us what are called the 5 stages of the sun. And let's do that, because this is a very important teaching that forms the basis of what we're talking about. Now, this is kind of different than you heard before, because we're not talking about sun gods. We're talking about teachings that exist before religion. And this is what my second book is about, From Light into Darkness, where I'm going to make a distinct difference between spirituality and religion, and where I state unequivocally that religion is the business that evolved of spirituality. That's why it's darkness. First stage is called Kheper, which we know as the scarab beetle. Everybody likes Egyptian iconography, has seen the scarab beetle, also known as the driller. Why is it called the driller? Well, the scarab beetle is an unusual little insect because it takes a ball of dung, animal waste, rolls it up, and then deposits its eggs in the dung. So when the young are born, they immediately have a food supply. So that's why it's called the driller. It's also became a symbol. The first stage of the sun is the dawn, when the sun comes up. Because as a great teacher, R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch, who, if you've ever heard of John Anthony West, is the greatest proponent of this man's teachings, he made the statement that the Egyptians, Cometians, used the known to evoke the unknown. And what they saw with this little beetle is pushing the ball of dung in front of itself daytime. They said, well, it was like bringing the sun disk at dawn, pushing the sun. So it became a symbol of dawn. So that's the first stage, the sun at dawn. Second stage is the famous name we all know of the sun, supposedly Ra. But here we're telling you, according to the indigenous teachings, Ra is only 1/5 of this understanding of the sun, not a god by itself. But we'll get to that. Ra means the stubborn, often depicted by a ram. In ancient Egypt, even though they had donkeys, they considered the ram to be a real stubborn animal. So that's the symbol of Ra. Represents the sun at noon. And I'm also going to return to what this means. Let's get the 5 stages out first. Third one is called Un, known as the wise. Often depicted as just a mature man standing on a staff. Next stage, Aten, which is going to be a big aspect in the book I'm writing now. In the book I'm writing now, I'm talking about the last 2 stages, the stage of Aten and the stage of Amen, which I'll discuss with you. Aten means the wiser. This is like twilight. This is the afternoon sun. Twilight, when the sun is at its peak and then starts to come down. And the last stage is known as Amen, written many different ways. And this means the hidden. And this is why we'll get to what we're talking about. And that's night. Now, the interesting thing about these teachings is not only do these represent a daily cycle of 5 stages of the sun, but also represent stages of consciousness in our development and also time periods in history. So that's how these cycles work. And this is why we're talking about continual cycles. In these man's teachings, there is no beginning and there is no end. They don't believe in a Big Bang theory. All they do is talk about cycles in between. There's no time, there's no beginning, there's no end. So Kheper represents a time frame that may go back as much as 65,000 years ago. Ra, again, as a true indigenous teacher, Hakim doesn't deal in exact dates. He's not interested in quantifying like we are in the modern world with our predominance of left brain thinking. He's more interested in quality than quantity. So these are only approximations. Perhaps 65,000 years ago, perhaps 50,000 years ago, perhaps 30,000 years ago, perhaps 20,000 years ago. And Amen, we can be more specific, which is about 5,000 years ago. Now, also stages of consciousness. This is the birth of consciousness, where we are born, reborn, to start to begin the path of consciousness. Ra, why it's called the stubborn, it represents an adolescent stage of consciousness, and we all know, all of your parents, remember when we were teenagers? When we're teenagers, we think we know everything. And we tend to be a little stubborn as far as learning something new. So that's like the teenage, adolescent stages of consciousness. Un is mature consciousness. When we've gained a little wisdom, we've become wise. And Aten represents the height of consciousness. The sun at its full flowering in the afternoon. We're at the full stage of consciousness. We're hard for people to believe, but in a stage of Aten, we're all enlightened. And Amen represents the fall. And every myth, Acharya talked this morning about the links of all mythologies around the world. Every mythology talks about a fall from the golden age, a fall from grace. Amen represents that. We're going into darkness, hidden. Everything is night, darkness. And folks, that's where we are now. Here's a different aspect of this teaching. We are in the darkest stage of these 5 cycles for the last 5,000 years. Even with our, I always like to use the expression John Anthony West uses, and it's a great quote. We think we're so evolved today with our striped toothpaste and our hydrogen bombs. And that dates us because teenagers don't know what striped toothpaste is anymore, going back to the 60s. But we're actually in the lowest stage of consciousness, and we're coming out. And the reason for these teachings, the reason we're bringing this out, the reason why he has been given permission to bring these teachings to the West, through me and others, I'm not the only one, is that we're coming to a new stage of Khepr now. Just like the Mayan calendar, just like you hear from Native American elders, we just did a great Star Knowledge conference in Minnesota where we presented these teachings to Native Americans, and they just ate it up. It was so much in line with their own traditions, their own teachings. We're coming out of this now. And here's another teaching I'd like to give you. Without offending anybody's religious tendencies here, Amen, Amen, Omein in Hebrew, which we all say in Christianity and in Judaism and in Islam in its way, at the end of prayers, we are taught to believe means, so let it be done. Thy will be done, so let it be. Well, actually it means, according to the Commission teachings, so let it be hidden. So let it be in darkness. Think about that. So this forms a framework for what we're going to talk about. And one last thing I have to give you, because it's essential for my presentation and for Christopher's, is another. 5 is a key number. And I'm bringing it up in this current book too. 5 is a number that the Commissions use over and over, along with the number 42. 42, why? They tell us 42 was the original number of tribes that made up ancient Kemet. And as was discussed this morning, in everybody's presentations here, it's great how we dovetail together. Hakim's prejudice, his bias, as an Afrocentrist, is that we all came from Africa, that it all came from Africa. Africa was the beginning of humanity and the civilization. So the 42 tribes we're talking about that made up ancient Kemet were all races, all types of people, including the Caucasian race. We're taught that we, Caucasians, came from the Caucasus Mountains in the steppes of Russia. Well, according to this tradition, the white race came from Africa, too. So we all came from Africa. So this ancient civilization, which was known as the Sesh, S-E-S-H, the word for the people, it was 42 tribes. And if I had time to show you all this, this continues all through Egyptian iconography. You see 42 assessors of Osiris. There were 42 steps that led to every temple. There's 42 this, 42 that. That number comes up and up again. So does the number 5. So 5 purs. And pur again meant house. So the first one is key. Per-ah, which means the high house. And here's a teaching to blow everything away you've ever learned about Egypt. The word Pharaoh. Pharaoh. Every day you can go on, see Zahiwas or somebody on National Geographic talking about the pharaohs, the land of the pharaohs, the Pharaoh Ramses, the Pharaohs Thutmose. Everybody using the word wrong, including myself for many years, using the word wrong. Per-ah is where the word Pharaoh comes from. In Hebrew it's per-o. Because the Greeks and the Jews later, patriarchal society, looked at the society of ancient Egypt and they saw kings and sons. So they said, oh, Per-ah must be the king's house. Well, it's not. The high house is the woman's house. You're talking about a civilization that was a matriarchy, where descent was matrilineal. Descent went from mother to daughter. So I say to you unequivocally, there never was a male pharaoh. Ever. Ever. The woman was the Per'ah, who she chose to be her consort, could have the right to be king. But it was her house. Men in Egypt were only residents in their consort's house. Think about that, folks. Think about that, men. And this, I mean, I could go on and on. There's a lot of books on this subject. If you want more information about the matriarchal, there's a lot of people who have written about it. So that's number one, pharaoh, throw it out. It doesn't mean male king. Second, per ka. We had that word ka again. This is your tomb. Per ka, the house of the physical projection, the personality, which they believe was attached to the body. So that's where the body was laid. Simple enough. That became the tomb. Third, per ba. Some of you may have seen the word ba. Ba has been translated as soul. I prefer the word spirit. The house of the spirit. That's your temple. That's where people would go to raise consciousness, to do chanting, all sorts of different techniques and exercises to raise your level, consciousness to a higher level, to be aware of spirit, to be aware that you're more than the body. So that was where the temple came from. Third, and fourth most important for mine and the next presenter, per neter. And neter is a key word here. That's your pyramid. The house of the neter. What does neter mean? Well, good old Champollion, Frenchman who worked 21 years to decipher hieroglyphics from 1799 to 1821, 22 years actually, thought he was able to translate the symbols of Egyptian, what we call hieroglyphs, which is a Greek word. And that's led to the whole field of Egyptology. Well, the fact of the matter is the Greeks couldn't read the symbols correctly. And I can go into a lot of detail, but that we don't have time. So all of Champollion's translations are basically incorrect. All of Egyptology's translations are basically incorrect. So the word neter, they translate as god or goddess. Somebody asked earlier, what about all the gods and goddesses of Egypt? Well, the mere fact is we're looking at two different levels of understanding, which I'm going to discuss in great detail in this second book, that there was an exoteric teaching and an esoteric teaching. The exoteric maybe is talking about gods and goddesses, but the true meaning of neter is not god or goddess. And first one, again, who did this in modern times was R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch, who was the first one to look at this word and said, wait a minute, this word doesn't mean deity like we understand. It means an aspect or principle of the divine. Part of the whole, not the whole. So neter is actually where the Greek word nature comes from. Neter, nature. So the house of nature, the house of energy. Pyramid, Greek word pyramidos, fire in the middle. Much closer to the true understanding. Had nothing to do with tomb. So of course at this point we always stop and say, in its original inception, in its original creation, no one was to be ever buried in a pyramid. Per ka is your tomb. This is not tombs. So this throws out 90% of Egyptology right here. They're talking about pyramids and kings being buried in pyramids. Nonsense. And Christopher will greatly elaborate on this and show you unequivocally how this was a machine, the Great Pyramid, not a temple. And it fits right in the concept of per neter. So we provide the cultural framework for Christopher's work. House of energy, house of nature. And he will go into detail about how. Now, when I first presented this, and this is in my first book, The Land of Osiris, which is still available, and this is it in Russian. If anybody speaks Russian, we have a Russian copy. I can't read a word of it, but we have it from a Ukrainian press in Russian now. I presented these four. When we were on tour together in 1999, Hakim was talking to our group, and he's going, okay, and there's 5 pers. And he went per ah, per ka, per ba, per neter. And he's going, ah, ah. And then he goes like this when he can't think, ah. Where's the 5th one? And he looks at me, and I said, Papa, you never told me the 5th one. I don't know. Maybe it's the secret one. Well, you're going to see it in the slides. We found it in 1999. And that's the 5th one, because everything comes in 5s, which is called per were. The house of the wise man, or the teacher, which is where universities came from. So that's the 5. So that forms your basis. You now have a working knowledge of chematology and how different it is than Egyptology. And because of time, I'm going to go into the slides, do a lot of talking with the slides coming up, and again, a lot of the preliminary stuff is in the land of Osiris, but we're moving forward that. We're moving beyond that. Where we're moving now into, and the presentations next year will be called From Light into Darkness, how religion evolved. And I make the statement, again, in a post-academic anthropology, religious studies, all the disciplines that talk about religion, they say we're hardwired for religion, that religion has always been a part of human culture. And I say nonsense. Spirituality is what we're hardwired for, not religion. Religion actually comes from a Latin word, religiore, which means to bind together. Religious scholars like to put in the word to bind together back to God. Well, Hakim always says that's intimating that we no longer were together, that we needed a system to bring us back together. But I'm saying, in the time frames that you saw, the age of Aten, over 10,000 years ago, we didn't have any religion. We didn't have any popes, priests, imams, rabbis, or anything like that. But we had spirituality, and everybody had the means to access the divine by themselves without anybody being a guide. And so the second book is going to talk about how religion evolved, how religion became a business, sold the concepts of death. In Hakim's teachings, there is no death. Sold the concept of soul, of God, and an afterlife. And that became religion. And I'll get a little bit more into that because we're going to get slides that are going to go there. So, here we are. Look at that. Folks are so good. We're right up. So, in this idea, thank you, David, of the land of Osiris, we talked about Kemet. Hakim taught me that there was a further definition, a further designation within Kemet that had a series of sites from Dashur in the south to Abu Ruwash in the north, which includes the famous sites of Giza and Saqqara. All these sites were known for having pyramids, pernetters, and temples, purbas, that are ancient, over 10,000 years, all connected on a grid line. Again, Christopher will talk about the energy of the Great Pyramid when he's up. All these pyramids work together in harmonic res to form an ancient grid. So, what we have here is the land of Osiris. From Dashur in the south, Saqqara, Abu Sir, Abu Ghurab, Zawayat al-Lawiyan, Giza, and Abu Ruwash. All these 25 square miles of this concept within the larger framework of Kemet was called Bu-Wizir, Bu being the word land. Wizir is the correct term for Osiris. Now, you've heard a lot of different people lecture and talk about Osiris and think they know the ancient way of pronouncing it. Again, obviously I have a prejudice working with this man who I've been working with for 12 years now, who I consider to be a walking library of Alexandria, even more than that, and that I accept his teachings pretty much straight forth, that this land, Wizir is the correct term, where the word wisdom comes from. So Osiris represented wisdom. They all had pyramids, they all had temples, and they all connected by underground tunnels. Now, I'm anticipating a question here. What about the Hall of Records under the Sphinx? What about what's under the Giza Plateau? What about J.J. Hurtak, who's saying that there's an Atlantean city under the Giza Plateau? Well, that's all possible. But let me tell you, because I've been in the tunnels under the Giza Plateau, how we are taught is those tunnels drilled through limestone bedrock, and Christopher will talk about the engineering aspects of this, straight through limestone bedrock, as much as perhaps 50 miles into what was the desert out here, which was the ancient river, to connect with water, to bring water to these sites. Why? Because water was the source of energy for the pyramids. Water. Now we know water, as the two aspects that Hakim wanted me to concentrate on my research was sound. Christopher will talk about acoustics, and water, and how they work together. I'm going to talk about how we think pyramids were built, how the stone was cut, how they were lifted and put into position before we're done. So the water was brought to all these sites, and in the tunnels underground Giza, if any of you know what Zahi Hawass has had to do for the last 20 years, they've had to pump out thousands, if not millions, of gallons of water to get into these tunnels, because that's what they were for, to bring water to these sites. Someone asked me, and in fact I was asked in a television interview this morning, what does the Ankh mean? I wear a nice Ankh. Everybody likes to wear Ankhs. Well, Ankh means life. Egyptologists tell you it means life. Well, it means more than that. Because in all the temples in ancient Egypt, the keys that they would open the doors with were in the shape of an Ankh. Why? Because it also represents water, because water is the key to life. Next. And there he is, Abdel Hakim himself. This is at a site where unfortunately we don't take tourists anymore. As things with tours, they compress to where the sites are going to take you. We used to go there. This is at Memphis, which was the capital of dynastic Egypt. He's pointing to Het Kapata, right here, where the word Egyptos, Egypt, comes from. And it only represented this one area, this one site, Memphis, Menefer in the ancient language. Next. Now, Per'ah, where does Per'ah come from? And this is at the temple of Hathor at Dendara, which was discussed earlier. David showed the wonderful slides of the crypts at Dendara. Well, this is on the roof. Now this is called a cartouche. You hear Egyptologists always talk about cartouche, French word. It means bag of holding or grocery bag. Well, actually, it's a knot of papyrus where Egyptologists will tell you that a king's name was inscribed. And that's another one that needs to be flushed down the toilet, because these people would never have put their common names up on the walls for anybody to see. These were titles. Again, 5, where are we going? Back to back, back, back. 5, again, 5. Each king of Egypt had 5 titles, 5 different titles. So what's in here is usually a family name, and it's usually the woman's name. And here it is, Per-Ah. And it's at the goddess's temple, the female Neter, and there she is. This is the glyph for Hathor, the house of Horus, or Hiru, which was not a sun god. Hiru meant the boy that becomes a man when he becomes enlightened by the woman. And that's a whole other story. But there she is, the original Per-Ah, Hathor, and it's meant the female's high house. Had nothing to do with the male king whatsoever. Next. This is a graphic a friend of mine made. This shows what would be temple per Ba. The Ba was represented by a stork. Why a stork? Because they saw a bird being able to transcend the physical world to leave the earth. So soul is spirit, could leave the physical plane, so they used a bird as the symbol. Per Ba, per Neter. Here's its term for pyramid. No matter what Mark Lehner, Zahi Hawass, or anyone will tell you, this was the correct term for pyramid. Per Neter, the house of the Neter, the house of energy. Next. And here it is. This is at Abu Sir on a nice, wonderful piece of granite. Per Neter, that's the sign for Neter, like a flag or a pennant. I will go into the second book, the derivation of the term, why it became this flag or pennant, and how these symbols became the Hebrew language, evolved into Hebrew. But this is the house of the Neter. This is pyramid, without a doubt. Next. Now here we are at Dashur. We start with the south. Why do we start with the south? Because the maps of the ancient Cometians would be opposite the way we are today. The Nile River in all its permutations, including the ancient river in the west, has always flowed from south to north. So to go upriver is to go from south to north. So we start from the south because this would have been, the Cometian maps would have been reversed. Dashur would have been at the top with Abu Ruwash at the bottom. So we started, this is 2 pyramids at Dashur. This one's known as the Red Pyramid. Why? Because a particular type of limestone has a reddish iron tint to it, so they call it the Red Pyramid. And there's actually 2 there. We're going to show you the Bent Pyramid. Now, again, I'm not going to go too much into what Egyptologists say because it really is a waste of time. But they say that this was built by a king. He actually had 3 pyramids built. Now, how they're going to discuss how he was going to have his body divided into thirds, have one belt. They don't go into that. But he had one pyramid, said, no, that's not good enough, build another pyramid. No, that's not good enough, build another pyramid. Well, we have a different story. These are houses of nature, houses of energy. Let's go inside. Next. I hope you can see this. It's sort of dark. Here's what, again, David showed these wonderful megalithic stones that he was showing all around the world. This is one single block of limestone here, weighs at least 100 tons. How they even got it into this position they can't discuss. And this is the inner walls. This looks very much like the Great Pyramid. Now again, this is different from what you hear from other people. A lot of people always say, well, the Great Pyramid is so unique, it's so different than any other pyramid. It's not so. Christopher will discuss the uniqueness of the Great Pyramid. It did have a uniqueness, but all these pyramids we're going to show you were built by the same people around the same time frame for the same purposes. And they show the same type of construction ability, it's the same type of stone used, and the same type of geometry involved. Next. And this is the ceiling. It's corbelled. It's recessed. Why? The Grand Gallery in the Great Pyramid is very similar. Well, we say it's for acoustic harmonic resonance. Again, he had me concentrate on sound. Christopher will discuss what a coupled oscillator is and how the Great Pyramid is functioning. But basically, all these pyramids were working with acoustic resonance, with sound, amplifying sound, and using acoustic energy. And all these pyramids were vibrating to different frequencies to work together as a grid line. And these walls were recessed for that reason. Here's the so-called Bent Pyramid. Now, Egyptologists will tell you this was a mistake. They started out with this 55-degree angle. They couldn't, 55-degree angle. They couldn't complete it. The architects came to the king and said, we can't go on, it's going to collapse. We have to change it. So they changed it to a 43-degree angle, and this was a mistake. Well, according to our teachings, there was no mistakes. These people didn't make mistakes. This is purposely at 2 angles for a reason. Christopher even mentioned this to me in 1999 when we were in Egypt together, before even knowing that there was another gentleman who said the same thing. And I'll tell you, Chris said, when he looked at this, So, well, it's probably utilizing two different frequencies of sound. Well, he didn't even know that a famous man whose name all may ring a bell to you, named Marshall McLuhan, The Medium is the Message, Canadian gentleman, went to Egypt in 1968. 1968, looked at this pyramid and says, well, obviously, this pyramid is producing two different frequencies of sound. And he's right. Now we're going to return to this pyramid, because this pyramid is part of a theory that we're working on. As you can see, this pyramid still has its casing stones on it, but the sides look like they've been attacked. We'll go back to that. Next. Here it is again from a distance. I don't know if you can see it too clearly, but this shows clearly that there was water here at one time. There is silt still available thousands of years after the fact. This all had water going here. All these pyramids were involved with water. And what's interesting here is the ground slopes from west to east, meaning coming from the ancient river, not from the river. The Nile as she is today would be over here. It has nothing to do with this pyramid. The ground slopes from west to east from where the ancient river was in the west, which is all western desert today. Next. And this, interesting, there's another pyramid at this area of Dashur. Just about a mile or so away is this structure, which is called a pyramid, which was built in the 12th dynasty, the Middle Kingdom pyramid, for a king who had a title Amenemhat. And Egyptologists will tell you all these pyramids were built by the same people, but this is built with mud brick. It's basically collapsed. There's basically nothing there today. Very little limestone was even used. David mentioned this morning. He made a profound statement. And this is so true when you study ancient Egypt. The further you go back, the more grandiose the architecture is, the more grandiose the glyphs are, and the construction. The more you go forward, the more it seems to get worse. So that's against our linear theory of evolution. If we're going from the primitive to complex in a straight line, as time goes on, we should get better, get more superior. Why did these people not? This pyramid is clearly inferior to what you just saw, because it wasn't built by the same people. It wasn't built with the same technology. That's why. And no one was ever found in that, by the way. There's no intact burial has ever been found in an Egyptian pyramid. Now here we are at Saqqara. Saqqara is a famous site. It's known as a great burial ground. The dynastic period buried people here for thousands and thousands of years. We find tombs upon tombs upon tombs. But we're talking about a time when this wasn't on the west bank of the river, which is usually where the dead are associated, but was on the east. And this was a great healing center, where great sound healing was involved. And I'll get into a little more detail about that. But we're taught from Egyptologists that this is the first true pyramid, the step pyramid of Zoshir, they call it, as if they even know who a Zoshir was. But they say this was the first pyramid and everything else evolved from there. Well, we say this is the earliest one. This is actually the latest one. This is not the oldest. This pyramid, we date at 1,300 years earlier than Egyptologists do. They dated around 2,700 BC. It's actually around 4,000 BC. The pyramids you saw and the great pyramids you're going to see are well over 10,000 years old. So this is more, and this was not a pernetter. This is a glorified perka. This was a mastaba, which means, Arab word means bench, where people were buried and a stone slab was put over so the jackal wouldn't get at the body and destroy the body. It was built one on top of another, until it looked like a pyramid or it resembled pernetters, pyramids, but it was not. This pyramid was not built to utilize sound, it was not built to be an energy device. It is just a glorified tomb. And they tell you that this structure dates from the same time period. This is nonsense. We could take you there and show you these structures. This structure is at least 12,000 to 15,000 years old, much older than this. One of the great teachings that Hakim gives to me is that in his ability, as I said, he's Western trained, he's an incredible archaeologist. And in archaeology, you're taught this idea of stratigraphy, that you look at layers, and you can see archaeological layers upon. Hakim's teachings are like peeling away the layer of an onion. He shows you the Islamic Egyptian layer that's there, the Greek layer, the Roman layer, the Jewish layer, the Coptic layer, the dynastic layer, and underneath is ancient Kemet. So what we talk about now is layers of civilization upon civilization upon civilization, and Egyptologists have confused it. They've put these things together where they think they see one coherent system when it's actually civilization upon civilization upon civilization. And I'm now going to show you a series of slides that illustrate that. Again, this structure, over 15,000 years. This structure, maybe 4,000 BC, 6,000. Now here's a wall that was built in dynastic times. Not ancient, but this is just, I mean, I could take you there, folks. Nobody goes here. We all go in here, tourists go here, do this. This is just 5 minutes away from this site here, and everything there is exposed for you to see what you're going to see now. But tourists don't go here. They're not allowed to go here. So now he says, move to the left. Next slide. And here we see bedrock, tunnels, going through, exposed. The Egyptologists have done the work for us, folks. It's here. Right through the limestone bedrock are tunnels. Move further to the left as we go again. Here's more tunnels. Tunnels going down. Remember David showed you these structures that were man-made. Well, this is a tunnel drilled to look like the symbol of pi. Greeks invented pi, they tell us. But we tell you that everything the Greeks learned was from ancient Kemet. So here are more tunnels. And look at this tunnel here. Hakim tells me, go forward, Stephen, take another picture. So we move closer. Here you see these tunnels again, going straight through limestone bedrock. And Christopher could perhaps address better than I how they possibly could have done this, drilled these tunnels straight through limestone bedrock. But here, we go closer, and we go again. Next, and look at this. Now, it's not perfect. Chris has come with his levels to Egypt and has done some measurement and showed this is not exactly a right angle, but look at this. We're going through limestone bedrock, and this tunnel, folks, goes down 300 meters and ends in water. And here we are at the great site of Saqqara where the healing was done. We're going to do this briefly. But what was done here, there's these niches. There's only a few of them extant. We take our tour groups here to experience this. There's only a few of them left. Only, in fact, 2. There were once 28 of them, 14 on each side, where, now I'll show you how this was done. There's a platform that's right here. It's a raised platform. I don't have a slide of it. But a patient who had an illness, a problem, would stand on this platform. The person who would go in here was a healer, healess, priest, priestess, would put their head in here. You hear incredible sound vibrations when you put your head in here. The healer would intone a sound frequency, would see an MRI in their mind of the patient, would see all their energy zones, the blood flow, the lymph flow, organ blocks, tissue blocks, would know immediately where the blockage was, where the problem was. A link was made between the healer and the patient, and the healing process began. Because anybody who here is a healer and has done healing knows that no one heals anybody else. No one, no doctor, no healer heals anyone else. All they do is act as a guide to allow the body to heal itself. And that was known in Egypt 10,000 years ago. Next. Now, at Step Pyramid, again, more recent, not a true Pernetter. This courtyard here, today, all sand, was once all alabaster. All the floors and all the temples of Kemet were made of alabaster. Alabaster is an Italian word. It actually means African crystal. It's for vibration, for sound, for vibratory effect is why they used crystal. They used water, sound, and crystal to accomplish what we're going to talk about later. Next. Here we go. Here's a great blow for diffusionism. And as I said, David, I, and just about everybody here are diffusionists. In 1997, Hakim met me in California before we were to engage in a major expedition to Egypt in 1997 in September, which is a major part of the research of my book. He told me he was going to show me evidence of a Mayan temple in Egypt. And I went, wow. The lights went off, bells and whistles. Here's my 15 minutes of fame. I'm in the history books if I can prove this. So we went south of Saqqara, and again, I just went back there a little over a week ago, so this still exists. And it still can be found, folks. Tourists are not allowed to go here. We had to pull some strings to get in here, but we did. We went south of Saqqara about a half mile, and here I came upon a temple of an individual Egyptologist called Maya. Well, Hakim says, again, just like the king's titles in a cartouche, this was not a person's name. It was a title, Maya. Interestingly enough, one of the words in Egyptian Arabic for water today is Maya. As Andrea can tell you, as everybody else who was with me just in Egypt can tell you, when they'd come around to our table and say, what do you want to drink? I'd say, oh, Maya. Oh, yeah, they'd laugh. How you know the Egyptian word. It means water. Think about that. Keep that in your mind. It means water. So it wasn't a name. There are many individuals you can point to in Egyptian history who had the title Maya. But here I'm looking at him. Okay, well, I'm looking at this and I say, okay, well, it looks typically Comitian Egyptian. It's a tomb scene. He's got his food for the afterlife. He's got all his protective spells. Next slide. And this is a key one here, which I didn't point out to you, but this is in my book. This is Askat, another symbol for water. Nefer, which means harmony. I have a whole chapter in my book called Askat Nefer, the harmony of water, how important water was to these ancient people. So this was a clue to me right away. Well, this was a wise man. If they put this on his tomb, it means he was smart. He knew the secrets of water. But still, I see nothing here to go on. Next. And here he is. And I just saw this again. The paint is still there after 3,300 years. Original paint still there. But I'm looking, is this a Mayan nose? Is this a Central American Indian? That's a stretch. So I said to Hakim, I said, well, you know, I know what you're trying to say to me here, but I can't go with this. If I go on a stage in a university in the United States or anywhere in the world, they'll laugh me off the stage. There's nothing here that looks like from an Indian from Central America or Mexico. And he says, well, you know the expression, when in Rome, do what the Romans do. He's living in Kemet, so of course he portrays himself on his tomb as an ancient Cometian. Well, I was crestfallen. There goes the 15 minutes of fame, there goes the history books, all of that. But there are at these sites these little men, old men in galabayas, and they're men because the women stay hidden, because it is an Islamic culture. It's not what it used to be. But the men, they'll come around to you and they'll look at you and say, well, there's something you should see. And everybody has a natural reaction, oh, they just want some bakshish. They just want a handout, you know, and you walk away from them. But sometimes they'll take you to something that you will be amazed. This little keeper, because I was with Hakim to begin with, didn't speak English. He saw I was perplexed and he came to me like this, come here, come here. We went to this little chapel area that was boarded up. We pulled away the boards, opened up the doors, and next, this is what we saw on the ceiling.
Oh my God.
That's not Egyptian, folks. It's not Cometian. Absolutely so, and I can give you verification of that. And I got better pictures now. So anybody who's really interested in this, went back a week and a half ago and took more pictures, more close-ups. It's still there. It's not even boarded up anymore. It's open for everybody to see, but they don't allow you to go there because there's excavations being done. But I can take you there, and I can get back there anytime because the magic word is Awiyan, the last name of my teacher. You can go anywhere in Egypt. And yes, let me continue, please. To verify this, it's okay, I appreciate your enthusiasm. Instead of going to Mayan archaeologists with this, I took photographs of this picture, made an image. I happen to know Aluna Joy Yashkin, who used to live in Sedona, now lives, she used to live in Mount Shasta, she now lives in Sedona. So you folks may be able to hear some of her presentations. She leads tours to the Mayan sites. She was a student of Mayan daykeeper Hunbat's men. I sent a copy of this photograph to Hunbat's men. He graciously responded within a few months, which mail from Mexico is pretty incredible. But he responded within a few months saying, oh yes, I recognize this. This is the language of my ancestors. In fact, he claimed he could read some of the symbols, that it's actually dating. It's usually time codes. And I wish Christopher O'Brien was here because we had a great conversation last night. He recognized this as pre-classic right away. And he says, what this is dates. But to follow that up, we even went further. I've come here to Sedona many times to give presentations. Our good friend was at David's bookstore last night, Dr. Chet Snow, who lives here in Sedona. He's put on a series of conferences called Crystal Healing Conferences. Another offshoot, which is a whole another lecture, is I've been involved in research in crystal skulls since 1979. So I give presentations for Chet on crystal skulls. So at his conferences was a lady named Flor de Mayo, who lives in Albuquerque. She's a well-known Mayan priestess and curandera, healer, priestess. I showed a copy of this photograph to her in 1998. I asked her, could you give me a comment on this? She said, well, this is amazing. I can't speak. Can I look at this for a few days? I said, sure. The conference was over. I went back to her and I asked her, can you tell me any impressions you have on this? She couldn't. She said, where is this from? Is this from Mexico? I said, no. She said, is this from Peru? I said, no. This is from Saqqara, Egypt. She said, Egypt? She said, can I have a copy of this to show my teacher? And I said, sure. Her teacher's name is a long name, basically goes by the name of Don Alejandro. He is the elder, recognized wisdom keeper of the Quiche Maya of all of Guatemala. He looked at this, immediately said, oh yes, this is the language of our ancestors. Without a doubt, this is Mayan. And then he related a story to her from his indigenous oral tradition, that according to the Mayans, they originally came from the Pleiades. When they came for the Pleiades, they came to 4 corners of our earth. One, of course, Mexico and Central America. Another was Northern Africa, ancient Egypt. And he said those people were called the Naga Maya. I went back to Egypt in October of 1999. She told me this in April of 1999. Went back with a tour with Hakim, told him this. First of all, he was greatly enthused that we had an indigenous confirmation of the find. And then he said, oh yes, Naga. Naga is from the ancient Cometian word Nag, which meant tribe. Tribe, Maya. Did the word mean in the ancient Cometian language, the tribe that came from across the water? I put it out to you. There's no doubt, folks, that this is not ancient Egyptian script. Next. This is Abu Sir, and we're going to have to move quickly so I can get all these in. Abu Sir has another true pyramid. It's kind of in danger, in being destroyed, attacked. But here, Egyptologists tell you this is a causeway where they led a procession to bring the king's body. Well, this is, first of all, sloping downhill. Right here is obviously the remnants of an ancient lake. You still have the reeds today. It only rains here less than 4 inches a year. But these reeds are still going under the sand and finding a source of water, which still exists. This was a lake. This was a causeway where water came from the west, which is behind us, from underneath the pyramid to this lake, without a doubt. Next. Now, here's an example of how they get it wrong, as David sort of said earlier. Here's a pillar of granite, and Christopher will address how fine the work these people did in granite. Perfectly round, perfectly smooth, and here you have glyphs on it. So Egyptologists, like most anthropologists or archaeologists will do, they'll come along and say, well, obviously we can date these, so we'll date the structure to these. But as I've taught Chris in the field, and now he knows it himself and can speak about it with authority himself, that's nonsense. This pillar cannot have been done by the dynastic people. As he'll tell us, as he already told you his little story, they didn't have the tools to do this. This pillar is over 10,000, maybe 20,000 years old. The later dynastic people came along and crudely chiseled these glyphs into it to represent supposedly a title of a king in here. And I just submit to you, because I'll show you further examples, the people who had the technology to do this chiseling could not have done this chiseling, could do this carving. So you cannot date this structure from these symbols. Wrong. And here's some basalt here. Here's Hakeem's standing, which he tells us was the remnants of an ancient dock where boats would come because it was all water to park near the Pernetter to bathe in the energy fields, to make offerings too. So again,